Alright, NCSoft just released their results for the first quarter of the year, and Guild Wars 2 kinda disappointed. Not in a disastrous sense per se, especially since the year is still quite long, but seeing sales drop by over 20% compared to the last quarter, or even compared to the first one of last year, which arguably might be more comparable, is still quite a big drop. So I figured it's time we take a look at how ArenaNet has been doing since they changed to this new yearly expansion model, what to expect in the future now that the next expansion has already been delayed as the studio is struggling to keep up the pace, how the game was doing before, and what other projects they're currently working on. Because while I might have been joking about one of them in my April's Fools video, it isn't a secret that the studio's attention has been going to places other than their flagship game. But let's start at the beginning for once, as the game's launch in 2012 was actually massively successful, with them managing to sell over $123 million worth of copies, and even the year after was a pretty impressive one, especially once you consider that the gem store was very different back then, with much less quality of life on sale, fewer skins, and not even outfits or mount skins. After that initial period, sales did start falling off though, but we would see renewed interest both in 2015 with the launch of Heart of Thorns and in 2017 with the launch of Path of Fire. But if you actually take a closer look at those numbers, then you will quickly see that these huge upticks in sales were hiding a very negative trend, despite new content being added. Because in between expansions, we would be getting Living World seasons, which would be free to anyone logging in at the time, but needed to be purchased if you missed out. And then 2019 hit, not COVID, 2019. Looking at the previous cycle, I think it's fair that most players assumed that they would get a new expansion announcement. But instead, they were hit with the rumors of mass layoffs, which eventually turned out to be true, and about a quarter of the studio's workforce would end up getting cut. Now, I want to put something in perspective here, because quite often the excuse is made that ArenaNet is a smaller studio compared to some of the other MMOs out there. But before these cuts, they reportedly employed 400 people, which really isn't that much of a far cry from the teams working on World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy XIV back then. Now that same year, fans would have another bitter pill to swallow, as they wouldn't get a new expansion and instead had to make do with the Icebrood Saga, which was more akin to an extra Living World season. And then the lockdown hit, leading to ArenaNet's most disastrous year ever and sales being at an all-time low. That year was also one of the first where we would get a hint that ArenaNet were secretly working on another project. And Jessica Price, an employee who would get fired later on, after lashing out and insulting some fans on Twitter, even claimed that they were mandated to make it look like all of their time was being devoted to Guild Wars 2, but that wasn't really the case anymore. Things did eventually pick up though, as after a rushed end to the Icebrood Saga, we would get that final expansion before they decided to adopt a new model. As a player, this launch was exciting, as we had new high-quality trailers, ArenaNet partners previewing some of the content, and the introduction of new mechanics such as fishing, a new elite spec, and even new mounts, which led to the studio having some of their best sales numbers in a very long time. From that point on though, we'd get no more Living World seasons, and the studio would announce that from 2023 onwards that they would release a yearly expansion chopped up into 4 smaller updates, as to provide players with more consistent content, and maybe more importantly, to leave some breathing room to their developers so that they wouldn't get stuck in endless cycles of crunch time. Now, one thing you could argue is that since the introduction of this new model, sales seem to be a bit more stable across the board. And we also did see an increase in revenue from 2023 to 2024, which will hopefully lead to some smart investments in the future. But they also have missed a mark on a couple of fronts. First is that better work-life balance for the devs. Anyone who's played the latter half of Secrets of the Obscure or any of the Janthir Wilds, with maybe the exception of the launch itself, knows that the story is severely lacking. A lot of shortcuts have been made when it comes to mission design, as we now usually enter an instance, maybe have to do a couple of tasks if we're lucky, and then listen to an NPC ramble on for a couple of minutes, before we get sent to the next one to do it all over again. And that, in my opinion, is just a shame. Because what if I told you that we're currently exploring the Mersant ruins, which they've built after having been exiled from Neos, and where they are hiding a mist gate straight to the domain of Anguish? And what if I then told you that that gate turned out to be the door of Kamali, that was originally found in the Burning Isles, and that they tried to keep shut so the Titans wouldn't break through and spell the inevitable demise of their race? And what if I also told you that these Titans were being created by twisting and tormenting souls in the Foundry of Failed Creations, which sits in the domain of Anguish and is a part of the realm of torment, where a fallen god had taken up residence and had 4 underlords, with one of them actually being a part of the map and another one being one of Doom's fallen generals, and that fallen god's followers were a seafaring people that turned into demons with incredible abilities. Well, that and much more we only find out by either following a blue shade through the Outer Ruins while they talk about their experience, or by reading various notes spread across the world, which if you don't already know about the previous lore doesn't really mean anything to anyone. But maybe the worst of all is that you go through all of this in less than an hour, which feels incredibly limiting if you've been waiting for 3 months to get to the next part of the story. That, however, isn't the biggest indicator of ArenaNet struggling to keep up the pace though, as a couple of months ago they had to announce that the next expansion will be delayed by 2 months, and that we'll only get an update on it during summer, which is when it would originally have launched. And this isn't meant to come off as a rant, by the way, but I do feel it's very important to be honest about where the studio is falling short of expectations. And let's actually talk about those. Janthir Wilds was in a sense a big hit, because the studio seemed like it was giving players everything they've been asking for over a decade, like player housing and the ability to wield spears while on land. Which actually begs the question what might be next. Most professions can now already wield so many weapons that adding another one might seem like it's gonna start to lose its appeal, and another elite spec would also present some issues, as that would have a massive impact on the balance team, who already has to manage 9 core professions and 27 elite specializations. So adding another 9 might be a bit too much, but maybe we could get a new profession altogether. That'd be cool, but we kinda already have a lot of archetypes covered, even if we include those from the previous games. So yeah, 2025 isn't off to a great start, and ArenaNet will need to come up with a very compelling case to make the players want to already pre-purchase the next expansion. But there's actually one more thing, and that's those side projects, because we had rumors that ArenaNet might have been working on the Horizons MMO, which has since been cancelled. And while we'll never know for sure if this really was the case, we do know that they already have another game listed on SteamDB, which a lot of outlets seem to think will be a collectible card game. And that fits right into what NCSoft mentions themselves in their quarterly report, as they're expecting sales in 2026 to go up by more than a quarter on the back of spin-off games, diversified live services, and a couple of other things. So all in all, the game is doing pretty well financially, but I do hope ArenaNet can keep delivering at their current pace while starting to not only increase the quantity of the updates, but also their quality. Because the game not only direly needs players to join the ranks, they need enough veterans to want to stay. And I won't go into this too much again, but we've seen an exodus of content creators over the years, as quite a few of their official partners haven't made any new content since End of Dragons, and some of the biggest names that still play have since diversified their content to also include other franchises.